Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, it can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on one, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and even more. I've recently started posting even some Substack articles to it, whether they be about cocktail creation or things that are happening within the industry or just whatever else I happen to decide to write about. Today, I'm going to be having Morgan join me from KALM with Kava. We're having a conversation about a product that I don't know almost nothing about, Kava. And given that we're in the middle of what a lot of people are doing with dry January or resetting some expectations on their alcohol consumption, Kava is probably really germane to that conversation. So I hope you guys enjoy what we talk about and have maybe a new understanding of this particular product that is in the marketplace. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this particular episode of the podcast. Today, I have Morgan Smith joining me as broadly as a Kava educator, but also as a representative from a company that is in that space. And I always love learning about new things. And I'll be honest, whenever I got the email about doing this, the first thing that I did is I sent a message over to my mom, who was a pharmacist for 30 years, was like, hey, tell me about this, right? Because there's a lot of people in a space doing things similar to this that maybe aren't so reputable. And she kind of gave me back the exact same thing that I found in my research. It was like, hey, this is pretty legitimate. Really long intro. Morgan, tell me about your business, how you kind of came to where you are, and then we can dive into what actually is Kava.
Yeah, so I own and operate KALM with Kava, which is one of the nation's largest and I suppose best Kava distributors throughout the U.S. We import Kava throughout the South Pacific from Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, and I also own a farm on the Big Island of Hawaii where we farm Kava, or Ava as the Hawaiians call it, and sugarcane and taro and all sorts of other things. So I've been in the Kava space for about 10, 12 years, something like that. KALM with Kava started about 15 years ago by my good buddy. So I've since taken over for him a couple of years ago. But yeah, that's a quick background about me.
Well, I guess if you're going to pick a space to working in a product space where it's primarily centered in the South Pacific, that doesn't sound like a bad gig, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's go into this really tropical location to source all of these things. Let's have a farm in Hawaii. You didn't grow up around Kava, obviously. How did you get there? How did you get to Kava?
Yeah, it's funny. I did not grow up, drinking Kava. I'm certainly not Polynesian. I'm not Melanesian. I'm not Micronesian. Any of those cultures that drink Kava. I'm big into ancestry. I really enjoy like kind of digging back into my family's personal history. And, most of my family is from England, Scotland, Ireland, and a little bit of Germany. And I always think like, Kava is one of those things that people are turning to because they're trying to get away from alcohol, right? So my past family's generations were creating, probably a bunch of whiskey and that ended up maybe not helping some people, but, and Kava hopefully will kind of reverse some of that. I have a family history of alcoholism. And so I was very concerned about that growing up. And of course, these days, a lot of people are kind of turning away from alcohol. And so it's kind of one of those things where I think, well, I wonder if my ancestors are looking at me going like, all right, nice. Kind of trying to reverse a little bit of those issues that we caused, but, no, I mean, it's a really cool place to go to. Obviously, we do source all of our kavas directly from the island. So I go there. I have trips planned every single year to go down there. In a couple months, I'll be in Fiji, and then I'll be in Tonga, and later this year, I'll be in Vanuatu. So pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. In a professional sense, weren't working in this particular space, and you are a representative of a growing segment, at least in the United States, of folks that some people in the alcohol industry are positioning it as a rejection of alcohol. I think it's a resetting of a relationship in a more appropriate fashion, maybe, where at least some of the younger generation aren't consuming alcohol at the same level, right? The volume isn't there. Most people don't have the same relationship. And when they do want to consume, it's usually through cocktail culture or through high-end spirits. It's not through Milwaukee's Best and whatever's on the bottom shelf of whiskey, which was 20 years ago, whenever I was turning 21, that was what it was. Now it's more like I want to actually enjoy what I'm consuming and the time that I am consuming it. But then folks are also looking at other things to consume, whether it be THC infused beverages, whether it be, kava, even a relationship with coffee, which is a different kind of a stimulant there. I think people are being more and more intentional. Given that you don't have the background, how did you come into the kava specifically? Like, how did you discover it? Where did this begin for you?
Right. That's actually the original question you asked me, and then I did not answer it at all. That's kind of hilarious.
I was trying to find a nice
My
way to
bad.
bring it back to it, but hey.
Okay. So basically, you know, I, I was very anxious and stressed because I was working in a very fast paced industry. I was working in technology. I was a programmer for a while, a software developer. I went into business analysis. I went into project management, and I was working almost always in the payments or finance industries. And so, 1 minute down of my systems, it involved some very stressful times, right? Because it involved, millions of dollars that was lost, right? And I had just had our second child, and my wife and I were dealing with that, and it's just stressful. It's a stressful time, and life is stressful. It's hard to kind of get through the world's issues and whatever it throws at you. So I went to the doctor. I said, "Hey, can you help me out here? I need something to get me through the day." And she said, "Okay, well, here's an SSRI. Take this for a couple of weeks. It'll kick in. And in the meantime, benzodiazepine whenever you feel like a panic attack coming on." Well, I went to the office a couple of days later, and I felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. And so I took a benzodiazepine, and I don't remember what I did the rest of the day. It was one of those things where it was just like I came to a couple hours
Mm.
later at night, and I thought, "Whoa, what happened?" Turns out I was driving coworkers to lunch. I was, doing all sorts of work, and I thought, "What is going to happen if my newborn son needs to go to the hospital and I'm out of my mind to take on this stuff, and I have to drive him, right? I'm going to, because I'm not going to realize that I shouldn't be doing that, right?" And so I realized I needed to find an alternative, because obviously that's not going to work for me. And also, when I was growing up, I was raised in a very religious household, right? So anything that was very like addictive, or had anything that would kind of stray away from that would, I'm not so religious anymore. But what I am is I recognize that was one of those things that was kind of given to me as a gift. Is, hey, just be aware of what you put in your body and make sure that it's not going to cause long-term damage. And that's why kava seemed so like a really good option. I tried so many different things, legitimately probably 10 to 15 different things, to see if they would help me during my issues of kind of stress, right? And kava was the only thing that I felt like I could use.
Yeah, I mean, it's telling that whenever you say, "Oh, I was prescribed a benzo," my brain can immediately name off, Xanax, Clonopin, Ativan, Valium. These are name brands that I know.
Yeah.
And even coming in some scenarios, depending upon what your religious background happens to be, anything outside the scope of prescribed by a doctor is really problematic. And that's abusing whatever. But if a doctor prescribes it to you, it's okay. Right. And so
Yeah.
the religious doors open and you say, okay, it's fine for me to take these benzos, which are useful in a lot of places. Right. There's no
Mhm.
disagreeing with that. But for the use case that you're describing, and for many people's use cases, it's not exactly the outcome that you're looking for and how you want to live your life. And finding alternative means, whether it be through homeopathy or any number of things, is a great way to go. But it sounds like you kind of got into the idea a few stages before the rest of the United States, maybe the world, started to understand that. Do you feel like you had something that kind of happened along the way that unlocked, like, here's a key to the rest of culture? Or was it really just a selfish thing, like, I want to fix it for myself, and then you figured other people might enjoy it?
A great question. And also thank you for talking about how, like, benzodiazepines are not necessarily a bad thing. SSRIs are not necessarily a bad thing. My wife is a nurse, my brother is a surgeon. I very much believe in Western medicine. So I don't want to come on here acting like I'm just some, like, just total, do a bunch of yoga and you'll feel a lot better. Sure, that might help. That's something you can put in your toolkit, but don't think that that's like the only thing that you should be doing. Listen to your doctor. Sure. But to answer your question, so back when I first started getting into it, there was not a lot of kava available on the market. and it was only being imported by a handful of people. And actually, it's kind of true today. There's still not that many people importing kava. It's a very small industry. So when I got into it, really, it was because I wanted to make sure that I had good kava for me. Right. It was very kind of a thing where I just knew that that was something that was going to help me. It was something that I wanted to enjoy. A part of me is like, yeah, I think other people would enjoy this too. And I like that you brought up the culture, because the culture of kava is super fascinating. A lot of people, when they look at these different islands throughout the South Pacific, they all think, oh, well, it's an island, right? You go to Hawaii, right? What you don't realize is that every island in Hawaii has a different culture. And that's the same throughout the rest of the South Pacific. And their relationship to kava is completely different from one another. So when you have different cultures drinking kava in different ways and farming it in different ways, and there's 100 different varieties of kava that you can drink every single day. And it was a canoe plant. And so it went from island to island, and it had different, they chose that specific plant every time they brought it, and that morphed over and over and over again. So it's sterile. So it's really an invention of the South Pacific people and their culture and how they wanted to drink it. And so that has kind of morphed into the US now, because we're kind of seeing if you want to look at an airplane as a canoe, how are the Americans looking at kava, right? It's a different animal, but it is similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it can be trying to discover new things as a person who lives inside of the scope of Western medicine can be daunting, right? Because we have all of these doctors can be your friends, right? You're kind of saying like, you don't have a problem with Western medicine, but rarely are pharmaceutical companies your friend, right?
Yeah.
They're they're owned by shareholders and they have a bottom line, and that's how they operate, and that's just sort of the way it's set up. And so anytime a new thing kind of enters into the market, there's a healthy dose of skepticism that probably edges into an unhealthy level of skepticism of a particular product. One of the things that I always find interesting about things like kava or THC or any number of things that have existed for a very, very long time, but we've sort of in Western culture forgotten that they might actually be legitimately medicine. When you think about, microdosing hallucinogenics and the impact that has on the brain, these are all things that indigenous peoples inherently understood, whether of any nation, whether it be a Polynesian culture, whether it be what was here in the United States before was the United States, or anywhere. Like there's these inherent knowledges that we kind of poo-pooed because we're getting smarter and we're advancing as a society, and now we're coming back around and understanding the pharmacology of it and the biology of it and saying, shit, we were probably wrong, these things might actually have value, which is where kava comes back into play. THC comes back into play. A lot of these natural things that exist that help us treat things that maybe people have always experienced, but they just found a way to treat it a lot more naturally, and most people are kind of shifting that way. It's a really long statement with absolutely no question in it whatsoever.
I agree, though. I 1,000% agree. I mean, it is really kind of fascinating to see. Like you said earlier, you had 20 years ago, the consumption of alcohol was very different than today. And today, now that like the federal government is being a little bit more relaxed on a lot of different things, and state governments are opening up, people are allowed to see kind of some different options that will help them relax, that are not the usual traditional thing. Because I feel like alcohol is the usual reset button for everyone. But there's a lot of options, and I think people should be aware of that.
Yeah, and alcohol as a reset button has significant consequences, both health and just societally speaking.
Right.
I enjoy having cocktails. I enjoy drinking as well, but I do it in a high level of moderation, as you should with kind of just about anything that you do. But I think that we kind of ebb and flow in what is acceptable in Western culture with our relationship with alcohol. We always have to kind of remember, like, our culture is really young. If we compare it to the rest of the world, if you go to Europe, if you go to Polynesia, you start seeing places that have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and we're a few hundred in, right? We're just a few hundred years
Yeah.
into our own existence. I guess walk me through, you make a shift from the tech space, right? You found this as a product that you wanted to consume. Um, but you make this pivot from a really high stress tech space into, which is another high stress thing of like, I'm going to start a business or I'm going to kind of begin this. How does that work? Like, what happened in life that you're like, I'm going to flip this switch and I'm going to move from one thing to the other? Because there's probably some skills that transfer, but it's not a direct line from being a software programmer, business analyst, project manager to own a kava business?
Yeah. So great question. So really quickly, I mean, I suppose not quickly, but the original founder of KALM with Kava, his name was Mike Munsell. He was a really good friend of mine. And I used to buy my kava from him a lot. And when I started my first business, it was called Cactus Kava in 2014, 2015. He helped me supply some kava and we became very good friends. Cactus Kava was my side gig, right? So while I was doing all my tech jobs and it became too much for me. And so I sold it. And then when I sold that, I became better friends with Mike, and he would come down to Phoenix all the time. He lived up in Montana, and his wife's great friends with my wife, and they would go have ladies' night while the boys stayed in and drank some kava and hung out with the kids. And, you know, we would go out to concerts, and it was just a good time, right? Really good people, really like just solid friendship. And Mike and Tiffany went to Fiji on their honeymoon in 2009. And that's how Mike got started, right? Mike was like, well, I really like this stuff. I need to bring it into the US because I want to share this with people. And so he started bringing that in. He was like my kava guru. He was a guy who like really taught me everything I know about kava. And I really just loved and respected him. In 2020, he passed away. And, you know, it was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do or deal with, right? And his wife has a chronic illness. And so, you know, she couldn't run the company. And she called me up one day and she said, Morgan, I have to shut it down. I can't do this anymore. And I said, no, you're not. You cannot do that. Like, you know, like in one way, you know, Mike dying was, you know, was sad. And then on the other side, his company shutting down was like, it was like worse than death. It was like his vision and his legacy was going away. And so I said, no, you're not. And I quit my job. And I moved the entire company from Montana to Phoenix in about a month and a half, which is a crazy thing to do looking back on it. But when I did that, I also bought his land in Hawaii. He had a small 5-acre plot of land. He had about 100 plants, and those 100 plants were kind of diseased and messed up. We bought some more land, and now we have 15,000 plants that stem from his 100 plants. You know, so we're kind of keeping his dream alive, and you know, I'm really excited about that. I can't remember if that actually answered your original question.
You got us
Okay.
most of the way there. So
Okay, sure.
you start moving the business, because that's what it was really like. How do you go from the tech space to
Yeah,
working
yeah.
in kava day to day? And so you had your own business, you sold it, which is unique, right? And this is a thing that shows parallels with a lot of maybe the bourbon industry, where you started off as a person starting a business in the space where Mike already was, and you were able to form a friendship with him, which is not normal in most business spaces, right? They're a little more adversarial. It's like, I'll
Yeah.
meet you at whatever trade show and we'll say hi and maybe have a drink. But after I go home, I'm doing what I can to try to steal your business. Whereas this was a more relationship of, I'll help you kind of along. And then as you started to absorb this business, right? So you take over, your friend passes away tragically. And you see there's a vision here that Mike created. What's the part that made you say, yes, this is worth saving, right? Because there's a lot of people have a lot of ideas. It helped you specifically, but was there kind of this central vein? It was like, I am so bought in that I want to do this as well. What was that thing?
Yeah. Mike had something about him that was really just fascinating because he okay, here's how he started. He went to the South Pacific. He literally flew down there to Fiji. He went down there to Vanuatu and he met these people that had nothing going on. They had zero economic opportunity, and they just didn't, kava was their only thing that they might have. And a lot of them, 2 of my 3 main suppliers still are from Mike, and they both started because Mike said, hey, if you plant kava, I'll buy from you. And so they built their businesses with him. And what that did is it created a situation where you've got this guy, Mike, who was just like me, right? He worked in oil fields. You know, he was not a kava guy, right? And I was not a kava guy. It's just that, you know, he created this beautiful sort of system where people were able to, you know, economically provide for their families, and they were able to help, you know, promote their culture, right? A lot of these South Pacific islands, their culture is dying because they're leaving the islands to go to places like Australia to work, and they're leaving all of that culture behind. And to me, the culture of kava is really the most important part of it. You cannot separate it from the people either, right? And so when Mike passed away and I saw that that whole system that he set up where people really had a beautiful opportunity to improve their lives would go away, that like I knew that what that meant was that legitimately thousands of people were not going to have a financial future. That's really what it meant. And I don't mean this to sound like I'm some sort of like savior or something, but that's just the reality of it. I don't know how else to say it. And so I couldn't let that go away. And I also just feel like he was such a good friend to me. And the plants themselves, they are a symbol of people. They are an invention of people. Without the people, they don't exist. And the reason those plants are in Hawaii was because of Mike. And if those plants died, that means that Mike really died. And so to me, I see these 15,000 plants and he hasn't really died. He's still hanging out with me and he's still, helping me out, So that's why.
It feels like a really heavy burden to carry, right? Like you're carrying someone else's
Yeah.
dream and trying to make it a reality, which can be an incredible motivator, right? Because it's not about money, right? And this is the thing, money is the essential thing that keeps the industry alive, right? That's what feeds everybody. But industrialization could make you a lot more money, but it also is going to destroy the culture around it, which is what we see in the ag space in the United States, where we industrialized, ag culture died off. Now it's starting to come back in as some folks re-explore the ideas of family farms and multi-generational operations. Those things sort of died in the 80s and the 90s because we wanted to be far, far more efficient. There's a lot of things and lessons that you guys can kind of pick up along the way. But given that, and I'm going to make some assumptions here, kava probably doesn't have a really wide path where it can actively grow, right? It's going to likely stay in those types of climates.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you may not be able to focus on industrialization, which is good because it preserves the culture, but you can focus on the quality of the product that is produced, right? Making sure that you're using the best quality kava, your agricultural practices are not damaging it, it's not damaging the soil, you're being as regenerative as you can. Kind of give me that bit of it, right? Because you're going into Fiji where, kava was sort of maybe possibly a thing, but probably not treated very well like that, at least at the onset, and now it's kind of growing. What are some key paths towards making this a commercially viable product as opposed to just kind of a niche one-off agricultural product that may die off in 5 years?
Yeah. So great question. So Micronesians, Polynesians, Melanesians, they've kept this alive for 3,000 years, right? So it's not going away anytime soon. There are some places where it was close to eradicated, like in Hawaii. There was literally probably hundreds of plants left because in the early 1800s, it was done away with. The monarchy, they decided it was illegal, and so for a couple of about 150 years, it was kind of in this weird gray area. And anyway, so I guess the long story is that or short story is that they I feel like it was always going to be alive. But when you start to talk about an industrial thing, right? These are third world countries, right? They don't have the infrastructure that we have. They don't have the power. They don't have the clean water. They don't have the machines, right? And in order to I actually documented one time going to Fiji, and I thought, okay, how long would it take me to go find a kava plant in Fiji? It took me like 28 hours, I think, from my house here, right? Because what it ended up being was like 3 flights and a really long, 4-wheel drive up into the mountains. And we're up in the jungle, and then we had to hike a while to find some kava, right? And it's because it's just not industrial. It's a lot of this land in Vanuatu, they don't pay for the land because what they say is, all these villages, they go, well, if you clear the land, that's yours. And that's what you can farm on, right? But what that means is that these are far away from any sort of industry. So when we start talking about it in Hawaii, right, you have access to those types of things. It's access to roads, pretty cool. Turns out like
Right.
roads are really incredible and we take them for granted. And so, we have access to roads, we have access to power, we have access to water. And so what we've done is we've created an agroforestry system on the farm where, kind of like what you're talking about, where in the 80s and 90s, when everything really started to get monocropped, we actually started with that on the farm. And we realized that it wasn't working because for all these thousands of years, the folks that were farming kava throughout the South Pacific, they would take a stem of kava and they would put it into the ground and they would put it right next to the taro. And the taro leaves would shade the kava and they would put it right next to a tree. kukui nut tree, or they would put it next to a sugar cane, kind of patch. And it would help shield it from wind, and it would shield it from all these different things. So now we're creating this regenerative agroforestry program in Hawaii where we basically mimic a forest, right? And mimic what has been done for thousands of years, but doing it in a way that's very planned out, right? Whereas still today in Fiji and Vanuatu and Tonga, it's much more, okay, we kind of in the middle of the jungle. We're just going to plant some things here and there. And, a lot of the people that are farming kava are smallholder people, right? They look at kava in their backyard as like a savings account. So when they have their 10 plants, they go, oh, well, I have to pay for tuition for my kid this year. I'm going to harvest 2 plants. I'm going to sell it to this guy over here, right? And so that's kind of how they look at it. It's not a big scale thing,
Mhm.
right?
And I like what you described there with how they were sort of co-cropping. It reminds me a lot of like Three Sisters in the United States, where it was like corn, bean, squash, right? So the beans protects the corn plant at its young stages. It grows above the beans, but then the squash prevents the ground cover, so you don't get a whole lot of weeds. And so you get 3 crops, 1 space, a lot of good. The beans are going to put nitrogen back into the soil because the corn's going to pull a lot out. Like there's a lot of things that people did because over millennia they figured out how to farm. And then
Yep.
we sort of broke it with monocropping, and then kind of came back to, well, we should do crop rotation so we can fix the soil. And we shouldn't break the soil a whole lot, right? Because it's releasing a lot of things that we don't want to release. We want to keep those sequestered, whether it be carbon or whatnot. Really, really long statement there. But so you talk about, how they're growing this generates a quality product on the growing side of it. Having any physical product can, in a market where maybe it's not super duper highly regulated, you can now have people in the same market with you with a similar or same product that maybe are adulterating or creating less than stellar product that you have to sort of compete with. How are you as a producer sort of combating that with your own product, right? Because you've got kava, you've got what you consider to be the highest quality kava, but how do you communicate that to the consumer in a meaningful way?
Yeah, so that is a big problem. It's been a problem for about 10 years now. People are mixing kava with all sorts of things. Obviously, I'm a kava guy. I love kava. I think it's the coolest thing ever. And personally, I feel like it stands on its own, and it does not need help from other plants, and it does not need to be used as a scapegoat for other things. And there's big, large lawsuits right now going on against some of these companies that are mixing kava with all sorts of other things and hurting people, right? And so that damages the reputation of kava. And that's really the primary reason why I'm even talking to you, is because I feel like the reputation of kava needs to be fixed, right? Because it's being blamed for a lot of things that are not reality. And so how I compete with that is truth. I think truth in just completely transparent sourcing, right? Where we actually get our kava from, how we do it. A lot of people will say, well, you don't even know like where you're getting it from. That's not true. I literally go to the fields. I talk to the farmers. I've been eating dinner with my family, and one of them will do a little video call with me, hey, these are my kids. And they pan over and they're like, hey, these are my kids, right? Like we know each other's families, right? And so I think it's very important that, people recognize that this is not just an industry. It's not just I'm buying some coffee from the grocery store. No, this is like, I know the people that grow it. And when you talk about things like that, then it creates a story, because it really puts a face behind these people. And it also allows you to say, okay, well, if kava is so important to this guy, right? This random dude, like, why? What is it about it, right? And so that's I really like to talk about that, because it helps people. It helps people relax, helps people chill at the end of the night without any of those long-term physical addictive issues that you get with a lot of other substances. And that's the beauty of it. Kava is not strong. It's not going to really bowl you over. You're going to remember what you did last night. You're going to remember, all the great conversations that you had, and it's probably going to help repair some relationships that you had if you're going to be drinking it with people, right? I feel like kava sells itself because it's not what all the other things out there are, right? That's how I compete. I think kava is just awesome on its own, and it's good that it's subtle.
So it sounds like you're kind of litigating the quality of the product in the public eye, which is a great place to be, right? Whether it be through transparency or through communication strategies, whatever it is, people connect, at least my experience, a lot of people will connect with the product better if they understand the people behind it. They understand what they're doing. This is why I think why we see a resurgence in farmers markets and folks trying to consume products that are made closer to their home, which was something we also did in the 20s and 30s that we sort of got away from because industrialization and making things cheaper and faster and all of that we've realized may make us a little bit sick if if we kind of let
Hmm.
it run super duper rampant. But you're putting a product out into the space that has some sort of an impact on the human brain, right? How do you navigate that with what can be kind of an ebb and flow and how the FDA is going to try to regulate things or make it available? Like, do you feel comfortable that it will stay widely available, or do you think that just a simple change in leadership is going to create a harder marketplace?
Great question. So first off, kava is regulated as a food. It's also regulated as a supplement. And so it just depends on how you label your product. A lot of people don't realize that the FDA doesn't determine what is a food and what is a supplement. The FDA gives that determination to the manufacturers to make. And then based upon the manufacturer's labels and their claims, that's how they determine whether something is how they regulate it. If I make any claims, that's a drug, right? So if I said kava will help you with your sleep, that's a problem. I cannot do that. I cannot say kava will help you sleep. I cannot say kava will help you with stress. I cannot say kava will help you with anxiety. It's not something that we can do. And it's because it is a supplement or it is a food. So I feel like from a regulatory standpoint, I'm not really too concerned because territories within the US, like American Samoa and in Hawaii pre 1950, ava in Hawaii has been consumed for 1,000 years, right? And it's a state within the US. It's a part of their culture. It's a part of their people. And, Hawaii specifically has made a statement with their Department of Health that said that kava is generally recognized as safe. The state of Michigan also said that. And so, we're seeing traction where states are saying, guess what? It's okay and it's good. And there's some states that are a little bit confused because the federal government, like the FDA, has not actually come out and said, hey, we believe kava to be a food, even though they were a member of the World Health Organization where Codex Alimentarius was made, which is like the general food sort of kind of dictionary for the world. And the World Health Organization also said that kava is a food. And so I'm not really super concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, I guess, and the thing that maybe it's not the FDA that becomes the concern. Maybe it's pseudo competing markets, and I think specifically about the path of marijuana, right, where it was widely available, and then a combination of both textile industry and alcohol industries. Like, we don't really like this being out in the place because the fiber, whether it be through marijuana plants or hemp, is widely available as a thing that could compete with other textiles. And then its psychoactive behaviors can compete with people's consumption of alcohol. And so then we have this really heavy fight against it for 50, 100 years. And that's starting to die off. But the alcohol industry is still really fighting THC and THC consumables because it's a part of their market space. Does that continue to trickle down as they start to notice maybe some folks, even the THC market, saying, hey, we're losing some people to kava, right? Because THC has its own impacts as well. Like, is this a thing that you think about, or am I just kind of imagining this stair step of an existence here?
I mean, you could, I look at the hemp or THC industry and I mean, it's a very parallel industry. I work with a lot of people that are in it, and I have for many years, right? And I feel like they consistently have these roller coaster up and down situations. Just recently, back when the budget bill was passed in the fall, the entire industry all of a sudden collapsed immediately. I know guys who literally had millions of dollars on the line that just immediately evaporated because of that regulation. And that's happened, right? Like when the 2018 bill actually, was started the farm bill and people started getting into hemp, all of a sudden the prices, plummeted from like $100 a pound down to $5 a pound. And all of a sudden all these extractors, they lost their wallets. And so this is, I feel like I know them quite well. And I know that, they're having these issues. They will consistently have these issues until I think federal regulations actually catches up and actually makes it legal. And so I'm not really super concerned about it because I think that the other part to it is that kava is just different, right? And personally, I've had marijuana products and I just don't like them. To me, I just want to fall asleep, and that's not really why I want that, right? And a lot of people, they get paranoid and things like that. So I think it's just different, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like how whiskey might be for you, but it might not be for me, right? It's the same thing with kava. So I'm a little bit concerned, right? Because I feel like once once kava really becomes super mainstream, there's gonna be like a Coors Light or something of kava that comes in and just kind of does some crazy things. But until then, I'm not really super concerned because the market, quite frankly, is just not big enough to really,
It's not big enough for anybody to do anything about yet, but it could be.
no,
It could get
it
there. And,
could,
you know,
it could.
you mentioned the hemp bill or the farm bill that had hemp in it, right? So I live in far western Kentucky, and we had a lot of farmers that went all in on hemp in 18 and 19. And that didn't go super well either because they had a lot of contracts to plant, and the extractors weren't there whenever it came time to harvest. And it was a really, really difficult opportunity. Most folks made it out of that 2 year period safely because it really shook out. But it's a really, really common story. I want to do a hard pivot here. You mentioned earlier you've got a farm in Hawaii. In that farm, you've got sugarcane, taro, kava. Like, what's the intent behind the farm? Are you trying to grow enough kava to supply your own, or is this just is it a hobby farm? Like, what are we doing with a farm in Hawaii? Are you moving? Like, is this where I'm gonna live here forever? Like, is this the homestead?
No, I won't live there. I do. I mean, so really, earlier I mentioned how kava was illegal in Hawaii, right? And that was back, I believe, in the 1840s, and it was illegal for a number of years, and it turned into something where you had to have a permit to grow it, and then when the U.S. took over, I think that kind of all went away, and you can kind of grow it. But the problem, though, is that after all that time, there just wasn't any kava being grown, and it was also illegal to drink kava during that time too, which is strange because you read about stories about people back then who would, they'd be a fisherman, right? They'd be doing their work during the day. They'd come home at night. They would drink their ava with their family, and then they'd have dinner, right? It was just a very common thing. And certain varieties of ava in Hawaii were reserved for commoners, and certain ones were reserved for kind of the priests, right, or the kapuna, and they had specific uses for different types of ava. And it was a really special thing. And the problem with that is that when it became illegal, and when people started to forget about it, you basically had a lot of people who don't know anything about Ava. Now, if you go to Vanuatu, where Kava supposedly started, you walk around, you see a lot of Kava. And if you go to Fiji, you'll see images of symbols about Kava everywhere. It has permeated the culture. In Hawaii, it's not the case. It once was. It once was a very big deal, and it's just not anymore. And I think that a part of me looks at that and I think, well, I think that if you look at the economics of Hawaii, it's filled with a lot of people who really are just like the nicest, coolest people, man. And they just don't have a lot of the same opportunities that we do on the mainland because they're on an island in the middle of nowhere. And I think that there's a real potential for agriculture to really take hold and be a big thing. And it should be, right? Most of Hawaiian food these days, and when I say most, I mean like 90% is imported. Why is that when you could grow it there? I don't know. They have cattle there. They have strawberries there. They've got all sorts of lettuces and they got all sorts of vegetables, but they import it all, right? And that's a big problem. So for me, growing ava in Hawaii, and when I say ava, it's Hawaiian and kava. When we're growing ava in Hawaii, it's a couple different things. I think that I really want to help with food security so that people have access to food that is good and nutritious in the local communities. I also really think access to ava is really important because no one can get it. It's very difficult to find. And I think that one of the big opportunities that we have in Hawaii is to distribute cuttings of ava so that people can grow in their front yards again. That's what I really want. I want people to just be able to grow it. I think that's like the coolest thing on the planet, to be able to go like, okay, well, you haven't been able to grow it before. And if you don't know someone who has it, you can't grow it yourself. So that's another big thing. So I'm certainly not going to just provide all of my kava from the farm because that also would, destroy all of the relationships that we've built throughout the South Pacific. And so really the farm in Hawaii is just one more kind of supplier. I'm looking at it just as another supplier, right? If you want to buy kava from Fiji, cool, I have it. If you want to buy kava from Hawaii, cool, I have that too.
Nice. I like that. It's not necessarily a vertical integration. It's just a growth, which makes a ton of sense. And it could feel contradictory to the concept of having a business of saying, I want to provide my cuttings to the locals for them to grow their own, right? Because now they're not going to purchase anything, but your growing path is really small. Hawaii doesn't have a huge population. And I would assume if you lost 100% of the market of Hawaii, you can still live off the rest of the world, right? Like that's the target market is the places that don't necessarily know about it yet. We've talked about it a little bit briefly, but what are the ways? What are the consumption methods for kava? Is this a pill? Is this a gummy? Is this a tea? Is this how are we consuming kava?
Yeah, so traditionally it's you take the stump of the plant and then the lateral roots that shoot out from the sides. And you take that. In Vanuatu they drink it fresh, so they don't dry it out. They just take that, they mash it up into a pulp, they add some water, and they strain out the pulp. And then you have your resulting beverage. Or other places like in Fiji or Tonga, they will take the root and stump and they will dry it out, and then they'll pound that into a powder, and then they'll put that into a strainer, add some water, and massage the strainer, and now you have the kava beverage. So sometimes when we're talking about kava, we're talking about the kava the plant. Sometimes we're talking about kava the beverage. In this case, kava the beverage, right, can be prepared either from the dried plant or from a fresh plant. So that's the traditional way to make it. That's the way that I prefer to make it. It's kind of like my moment of zen every night. I go into the kitchen, the house is quiet, the kids are asleep, and I can just sit there with my kava and just kind of massage the bag and get it, get all the good stuff out of it, kind of like a tea. The other ways to make it are like instant kava or micronized kava, where you just basically it's kind of like instant coffee, right? You just kind of dump it into your water and stir it up. And then there's also kava extracts. Extracts are not as like efficient in terms of effects, right? So you're never going to get the full kava experience with extracts, but we do have gummies, we do have kind of juice concentrates, we do have droppers like a tincture that you can use, and it'll get you, maybe halfway there. But the full experience of kava is the traditional way.
So you said micronized. What does that mean?
So many people in the industry, they will take the entire kava root and grind it very, very finely. I personally don't do that. What I do is I take traditional kava and I sift out all of the big fibers, and that resulting kind of like bottom portion. We've been talking about marijuana a lot. It's like the keef, right? It's like the keef of kava, right? And so you have very fine sifted kava that you can just mix directly into water.
And then so concentrates are another option that you mentioned. How do you get to a concentrate?
So we take the kava root, right? So it could come from any of those different countries. We take it to our extractor. They do a CO2 extraction of it, and you have basically a CO2 paste, right? It's very waxy and oily. They take that and then blend it up with some coconut oil to emulsify it and make it water soluble. We add some juices to it and throw it into a bottle, and you can drink that.
So, and is this similar to hemp, and the extraction can be done CO2, or it could be done alcohol extraction, which alcohol extraction is usually lower quality. Is that a correct statement for you guys as well?
Yeah, I mean, so it's
a different quality, so I don't offend anybody, but I know CO2 extraction is usually preferred.
That's a really funny thing that I like that you just brought that up, because a lot of people in the kava space, they're like very anti-alcohol, right? And so they just immediately go, well, if it was extracted with alcohol, that's a big problem. But if you know what extraction is, like, you're not going to get a bunch of alcohol in your extraction. That's just not the case. Personally, if I'm just being super honest with you, I think that an alcoholic extraction of kava is superior to CO2. But a lot of my customers are very wary of it because they came from alcohol and they don't want to drink alcohol. And so I do CO2 purely because I just don't want anyone to have any sort of concerns there.
It checks out. And if somebody is looking for something to consume that may have, a history of substance abuse in their family or even in their own life, this is a place where it's a lot safer to kind of dip into CO2 as opposed to alcohol extraction.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Like, an alcohol extraction is closer to a tincture than maybe a CO2 extraction is. Folks are used to that. When you think about marketing your product, right, usually companies have a persona. They have a type of person that they're going after, at least initially. In the stage that you're in with Kava, what does your market look like? What are you after?
So I my bread and butter has always been guys like me. They typically are balding white guys. Just kidding. They're generally like 35-year-old, but basically 25 to 35 years old. It skews about 55% men to 45% women, and a lot of people are, and if you look at any of the articles out these days, we talked about it earlier about how like millennials are kind of like, issuing alcohol for all sorts of other things. A lot of people are kind of in the wellness space. They're just trying to feel a little bit better. A lot of people have kids and they're just like, well, I just want to be able to remember what I did last night with them. And I also want to like not screw up tomorrow for today. And so a lot of people in the wellness space, but a lot of people who are just kind of also experimenting. It's January right now. A lot of people are thinking about dry January. Well, let's see if maybe this is something that will work for me. And so that's kind of what I look at is I just go, well, maybe someone is looking for something that, and it's also, by the way, you don't have to stop drinking, right? If you like drinking and it's not a problem for you, who cares, right? But maybe on those weeknights when you're like, I know if I drank tonight, tomorrow I'd pay for it and I need to go work, maybe kava is a good option at that point. Those are the kind of people that I talk to.
Yeah, it's, the consumption of alcohol has a series of consequences. If you're health and wellness minded and, if you're a type of person who measures your macros, you have to plan well in advance when you're going to consume alcohol because it's going to have an impact on your workout quality or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I both like and dislike the fact that dry January exists, right? I fully support sobriety and people that want to adjust their relationship with alcohol. I just really don't think that January is the only time you should be thinking about that. Like that's an every month
I'm with you,
conversation
dude.
for me. A lot of the folks in the same space as me that do podcasts, like they do it as kind of a public service announcement, like, oh, we're going to do dry January because we want to make sure folks know they can reset those relationships. And this is, the things like kava are just another tool in your belt of things that you want to consume for whatever benefit it might have for your life, right? I look at alcohol as a social tool, right? As a part of a group setting. And most of the time I end up sitting at home alone, but I may be on a Zoom call with a bunch of friends because we're geographically dispersed and it's a thing that we all sort of enjoy. And you have a lot of things that are like that. Kava just being another one of those that has significantly less impact to the end consumer, the person who's actually using this. I guess if we were to kind of look into a crystal ball 2 to 3 years from now, what do you want to see from KALM with Kava or just the Kava industry specifically, right? Because world domination doesn't happen in 3 years, but what's a real
Yeah. Look, kava takes at least 3 years to grow. So maybe 2 years, depending on kind of what's going on. But realistically, you want older kava. You want probably 4, maybe 5 years old kava. And right now we're experiencing a kava shortage. A lot of people that just, we're kind of coming out of the tail end of COVID, right? If you look at that timeline back then, travel wasn't happening. And I think a lot of people were very concerned. And so they didn't plant as many plants as they should have, right? And so what I'd like to see is more concern for people that are out there planting this stuff because they're not educated like you and me. They don't have that sort of foresight to understand what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years if they don't do something now, right? That long-term perspective is maybe a little bit skewed. And so what I would like to see is investment into the kava space where people are really understanding what happens when you don't plant and why do we continue to plant this stuff? Because it helps, all of these communities throughout the South Pacific. And what I'd also like to see is a little bit more transparency. I'd like to see kava companies out there really showing their lab tests, saying, okay, this is what we test for, and this is how we test it. This is why we test it, right? I think a lot of people are concerned about like, oh, well, I don't want people to know why we're testing kava. Kava is an herb. It's grown in the middle of the South Pacific, and we need to make sure that whatever we're putting into our bodies here in the U.S., it's not going to hurt us, right? And so we have to test for things like E. coli and salmonella. They do it for peanuts here in Georgia. They do it for all sorts of different crops here. Why would we not do it for kava as well? And so I think that I want people to be transparent about what kava is and where it comes from, and really what they're doing and where they're sourcing it from.
Yeah, and I'll kind of dovetail into what you just said there. If you are a kava producer, get the tests and publish them now, because all it requires is a handful of bad reactions in the United States to create an infrastructure that requires you, right? So I think about the lettuce industry, the tomato industry, all of these folks that are having to submit regularly, like the volume of compliance and regulatory that happens to the American farmer that is producing tomato or lettuce or whatever else that's going to go into the human food supply is really, really significant. If you do the work on the front end, maybe they don't ever require you to do it because you're already doing it. Whereas if you wait for the federal government to show up and tell you how to do it, it's going to suck. It's going to suck really, 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 really bad.
Absolutely.
So that's my encouragement. We're almost to the end of our time here. I want to ask one question, and you may or may not have an answer to this, but if, looking at your preserving you're preserving somebody's vision, but I'm sure there are things that you've kind of bolted onto it to try to grow it a little bit further than what maybe Mike originally wanted. And so if Mike were here today, seeing the company that you've taken over since you've taken it over, what do you think he'd be the most proud of?
Oh man, you're gonna make me cry.
You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I'm not trying to.
No. I appreciate it because I have a picture of him I'm at home right now, but at the office I have a picture of him on my back wall, and I think about him all the time. I was reading his text messages back in 2018, a couple months ago, kind of like in a way, just kind of looking back and thinking, well, what would Mike do in this situation? And he had all sorts of ideas, really cool ideas, and specifically for the farm, because I had asked him in a text message. I said, "Hey, what would you do, or what are you going to do with your crops?" And he said, "Oh, I'm probably going to do this and this and this." And so I've actually kind of taken that on as like, this is going to be like his last sort of vision, his last sort of request was to get these types of products out. And I can't reveal them right now, but that is where I'm going. Is I'm taking what he actually said in 2018, and I'm doing it in 2026, 2027, 2028. I have plans to do that. So I think that he would probably be most proud of that. He'd probably be most proud of continuing to work with the same people that he's been working with, the people that he cared about. And I think he'd also be very proud that, the plants that he first started growing in Hawaii have, they've got tons of progeny, and soon people will be able to enjoy all of his work. Right. I think that's really, really cool. Thanks for asking that question, actually.
No problem. And I'll say this, I don't know anything about Mike other than what I dug up in the research, but there's a testament to the quality of character that Mike had, that you want to pick this mantle up and you want to move forward. And then there's also a testament to the quality of character of a person like you and the way that you have shepherded this forward and the way that you are considering these things. And so you should kind of, maybe pat yourself on the shoulder. It's a thing that comes out of tragedy, but it is an important thing. And I'm glad to hear there are people like you in industries that exist, period, right? This isn't just profit driven. There's a vision, there's a direction, there's an outcome that you're kind of steering towards. And I hope that you're rewarded in an appropriate way, right? It's not necessarily always money, but money helps the business grow. So that's always a super duper important thing. I do want to give you, if you've got 30 seconds or a minute of anything else that you wanted to talk about, it's all yours. Otherwise, we're gonna put a pin in it there, and we'll have to talk some more, because I only asked like 3 of the 20 questions, and the rest of them came off of the notepad that I told you I was writing. So
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, follow us on all of our socials, right? Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We've, KALM with Kava is all over the place. KALM with a K. One major thing I want people to understand is that Kava is normal. It's just like coffee for the afternoon. It's safe. It's something that's not going to hurt you, and it's not going to cause long-term problems. And, if you're thinking about finding something just to help you kind of wind down at the end of the day, Kava could be it. If not, that's fine too. Let's just be friends. Let's connect. Let's hang out. Yeah. And I just appreciate your time. Thanks, John.
yeah, thank you. Thanks for tuning into this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram at EmbellishPod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, so details, accounts, contacts, and maybe even a few Substack articles if you're interested. Thanks for stopping by.